Right. Well, Mark, thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about Build Up. Um, so, as before we get started and dive into your background, can you just briefly introduce yourself and briefly introduce Build Up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Brian. Having me, talking to me across the country. Um, my name is Mark Martin. I am an educator by trade. I've kind of lived all over the country, from originally from North Texas. Grew up mostly in Huntsville, Alabama. Had a 2-year stint in Buffalo, New York. So very different weather there. Um, but after graduating with a finance degree from the University of Alabama, I did not want to work in a bank, and instead I ended up in a first grade classroom in Atlanta, and that kind of made all the difference. Got hooked on inner city education, and just obviously working in a place that 99% of your students are at or below the poverty line changes a lot of how you look at the world, especially coming from a fairly working class, middle class background. And so wanted to make a difference there. But after 14, 15 years of uh, public education and in New Orleans post Katrina, I started a charter school as well. So um, a public charter school, but just seeing all the challenges that our kids had that they brought into the classroom with them. Um, and most of these were decided around, home life, home environment, neighborhood they live in. That dictates so much of the opportunities we get or don't get in life. Um, I decided to step back and go back to school, and was hoping to find some answers in this doctoral program at Harvard. And unfortunately, found a lot more educators there who were frustrated by everything they'd been dealing with as well. And that ultimately led me overseas, looking at the Swiss German model, where they never really got away from apprenticeship learning. And because housing is such an impactful piece of our lives for every young person growing up in this country, and it's also part of the American dream, is owning a home. It kind of starts with that, building wealth that you can one day pass on to your kids or grandkids. Well, I decided, if we know that the construction industry needs employees desperately, especially young people and people of color, they're looking to diversify more, plenty of jobs for females as well. And we know that housing impacts everything. Well, why can't we put young people to work solving their community's problems, giving them a quality education? So Build Up is first and foremost a high school. We're a private accredited high school, but we're taking young people from the west side of Birmingham, providing them with high school education, but linking all of that to the workforce skills as well. And then they go put that to practice, remodeling, renovating, and even some new construction stuff over here in their own neighborhoods. And then ultimately the goal is that they become educated, qualified for this industry with credentials, and then kind of anchored to their community through home ownership. And we've been at it for 5 years now in Birmingham, and it's, the timing is right for it. It feels right to have a dignified model of community revitalization where young people are, impacting their own communities, and we're just giving them the tools, both literally and figuratively, to be that change that their communities need.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I first learned about Build Up, through some of this social impact housing, I'll call it network. And was fascinated by it. And, I was and sort of learning about your background, just reading up a little bit on your background. It was really fascinating to see. And I'm curious to learn more about how all of these experiences you've had have led to Build Up. So I wanted to start. You had mentioned that you're from North Texas, but you lived in Alabama and then Buffalo. So tell me about, growing up. It sounds like you had lived a bunch of different places, and what was that like, I guess?
Yeah, well, one, it exposed me to a lot of different housing markets, and of course I didn't know this at the time, exposed me to different types of architecture, exposed me to extreme weather, extreme heat in the summers of Texas, extreme cold and snow in Buffalo, New York, right off of Lake Erie. So, and all those things obviously impact housing and impact the way we get around. Exposed me to, living in Boston, got to see finally what quality public transportation looks like, and how that can help facilitate opportunity for people who may not be able to afford a car or car insurance or gasoline. And so all these moves kind of, I think, open my eyes to a lot of just how the world works, how government works at different degrees, how we how we think about communities and neighbors and things like that. My dad was a railroader in Texas, but the nature of their work was that they would be 12 hours on and 36 hours off. And he was, I'm programmed a lot like him, that I can't just sit and relax for 36 straight hours. So he got into real estate just as kind of something to do on the side, because otherwise he'd get bored. And I'd say in Wichita Falls, Texas, is probably the worst place in the country to have invested in real estate. You want to see prices going up if you own land, and that never happened really over the course of 30 or 40 years. But he was a landlord, and got to see how rental property can bring in some extra passive income from them. And he was kind of a entrepreneurial in the ways that he did it. Owned some trailer parks, and renovated some big old house into 4 units, things like that, of just reconfiguring houses to be able to produce more. So got to learn a lot about that. My own high school experience in Huntsville, Alabama, I think shaped a lot of this too. I was bored out of my mind in school, and a lot of our students, especially in inner city communities, are. Another handful of them drop out because they have to put food on the table and they have to go work at a fast food restaurant or something. So that knowledge of that, I had one of my first cars was an '83 Camaro that just was constantly breaking down. So my junior year, I started taking automotive technology classes, and not only did it get me out of my high school for 2 hours a day, it taught me real skills that over the summer I could put to use working in a tire shop and changing out tires and doing oil changes and things like that. I'm pretty self-sufficient in fixing my own vehicles up. So I learned how skills in this world pay off. Not all of us can develop the basketball, baseball, soccer skills to make a living, but skills matter. And so even though I kind of knew I was going to a 4-year college, just because when I ended up having, with my 2 step parents, having 4 college educated parents, like college was kind of an obvious next step for me that, we didn't talk about a lot. It was just expected, but, with tuition prices on the rise, and, and some kids just, some kids don't want to go to college these days, but also not all jobs need a college degree. And so Build Up kind of emerged from all of that, just seeing what works, what doesn't work in public education. We tried to solve a lot of problems at once. For instance, our students get an educational stipend. So we pay our kids to be here, but to be working hard, right? And hard work should pay off. And if we're going to teach them financial literacy skills, it's really hard to do that in a vacuum or in a classroom where you have no money in your wallet and it's all, theoretical. But we're giving them paychecks, and they have to budget their paychecks and set aside some for savings and think about the future. And the good news is they make lots of mistakes. They blow their money. We had somebody who basically scammed some kids in our first year on Facebook. And better to learn then, when you may only have $100 or $200 in your checking account, than when you have real responsibility and a mortgage to take care of down the road. So, through this process of education and learning, and making mistakes is fine. Making mistakes on the job is fine. As our kids get into internships, junior and senior years, if they're not cutting it, we want them to get fired from the job to know what the world's like. And again, 16, 17, 18 is the time to make those mistakes, not once you have real responsibilities in this world. Yeah, in a lot of ways, even though my background is very different than a lot of what our kids are growing up in, and everything from different race, different economic status, socioeconomic status. Many of our kids don't have, 2 parents and that are there to support them and mentor them. And I had coaches and, like I said, 4 parents. 3 of the 4 were good parents and supportive parents. Although those things were very different for me than they are for a lot of our students, I think a lot of the lessons that I took away from my childhood are providing opportunities in this form of Build Up for our kids to be able to achieve more and achieve it faster. It took me till I was, I think, 27 or 28 when I bought my first house in New Orleans, and our kids can own a home by the age of 21 with a 0 interest mortgage with our program. So, and start making money a lot sooner than I did.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear that you went through that automotive kind of training in high school. and I could tell. I watched the video on Build Up's website, and kind of the overview video, and I could, you meet with some directors of nonprofits, and you would assume that they're behind a desk a lot of the time, but I could, just seeing just the ethos of that video, and you're like filling with some power tools or cords in the background. I was like, okay, Mark knows, like, it's build up, and that means, Mark knows how to build things. He's got his hands, and he's not afraid to get them dirty. So I could tell that that's part of the program, part of the ethos that you have, and maybe that's from growing up.
I'm still behind a desk way too much, though. Let's be
Right.
honest. My job largely is fundraising and partnership building, but I think for us to get a feel for how the program could run, and especially early on when we were just getting it off the ground 5 years ago, I was definitely had, power tools in hand and was right there alongside the kids. But it's an expensive model, but I think the investment is worthwhile because the outcome and the transformation in both kids and communities is pretty impactful.
Mm-hmm. So you're growing up a couple different places, and you're getting your hands dirty. And what I found what was interesting, you said, is you were really bored in school, but seeing the diverse background in your education, MBA, undergrad finance, PhD, it's like, wow, you must love to learn. And that diverse background, educational background, I just think it'd be really interesting to have that. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how that came about for you, that kind of, I'll call it that triple threat of education that you went through, and how did you, what was your inclinations, I guess, there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I didn't have any of those pieces mapped out, especially going, once I became a finance major, I always kind of thought I would get an MBA, but I focused on social entrepreneurship. In my MBA, I was writing a business plan to start a charter school. So my path through my MBA was very specific to kind of some of my hopes and dreams. But again, I didn't, my stepdad still asked me, what I want to do when I grow up. But I think I wanted to impact people's lives. I got hooked on education, as I mentioned, after about 3 years. I did a program called, I did Teach for America. I ended up teaching for 3 years. It's kind of you're brought on to teach for 2 years, and you can, of course, stay in the classroom, and I did stay on extra, but I kind of knew after the first semester that I was going to stay on at least a third year. And then about a year and a half in, I'd just seen too much struggle, too much of the brokenness in our school system in Atlanta, and I built this awareness of how schools elsewhere in the country work, and it wasn't a lot better for the kids that I cared most about. And I just wanted to be able to impact change with that. Now, part of the reason schools are failing often is that money is always at play, and we talk more about where there's not enough money. Certainly in the Deep South, we don't invest in education as much, but we have a lower cost of living as well. But I think what I realized along the way is it's more about how we're spending that money, and are we spending it in ways that lead to the outcomes that we want? Are we investing it wisely? Are we eating it up at a centralized district that largely isn't impacting what's happening in the classroom anyways? Are we overwhelming our teachers, asking them to do too much, or can we partner? So a lot of what Build Up does is taking the burden off of teachers' shoulders to be the nurse or the guidance counselor or the friend or the mentor or the after-school tutor or Uber driver home, and instead can we just free up teachers to teach, and then can we bring on construction partners to mentor and intern our students at an earlier age? Can they hire them on eventually as apprenticeships or as apprentices through an apprenticeship or registered apprenticeship, so they can come away with tangible skills and sheets of paper that matter in the world, like a license or a credential of some sort that has value in the industry. So those are all things that I think I picked up on along the way. A lot of, again, where I kind of started with it was a lot of charter schools were failing because you're essentially running a small business and a school. And the folks that were running them were teachers who'd never gotten that formal training of small business entrepreneurship, and that's kind of why I ended up going that route, was to deepen my background in financial planning, management, marketing, all these things that we know are pretty critical to running strong businesses. So yeah, that's all been part of it. And now I've taught everything from pre-K to, we were pre-K through 8th grade middle school in New Orleans, and now we're running a high school and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And we're just trying to focus on implementing more of what works and doing things differently, kind of challenge that status quo that we seem all too comfortable with here in this country.
So you do your MBA, and in your MBA, you're basically writing your business plan to start this charter school. And then you start the charter school pre-K through middle in New Orleans. And so what did you learn? It sounds like one of the things you learned was it's sort of charter schools have this bifurcated mindset where you're running a business and a school, and it's really tough. Were there other lessons from that you, when you went to create Build Up, that you had applied, or what was what valuable insight did you gain from running that charter school?
Yeah, I think one is that it's within the four walls of a school building. There's only so much you can impact. And even though, and this was post-Katrina, so we in many ways got to reset. We literally had the first school to be rebuilt after the storm, a $32 million beautiful facility. It was kind of a school that we felt, our kids deserved for the first time, because pre-Katrina facilities were just god awful in New Orleans because so much of the money had been embezzled, corrupted. I think 5 out of the 9 pre-Katrina school board members ended up in jail. There was an FBI field unit set up inside of New Orleans public schools because of how much corruption and poor management there was. But what I realized in all of that is that we put way too much burden on teachers' shoulders, and educators' shoulders in general, and that this is, businesses are really good at kind of throwing money at the problem. You may have a Chevron or a Shell, setting up a STEM classroom in a high school, and yeah, we need more engineers, so give them some STEM training, but they still leave the brunt of the work on the teacher's shoulders. And then the companies are really good at saying, these kids aren't ready to work here. You're sending us ill-equipped young people. And again, in Switzerland, where I spent a decent amount of time studying and actually being over there, seeing about that, I went to a school that was focused on masonry and also a school that was focused on banking and insurance. And so their high schools are very different from ours.
Wow.
They're focused specifically on industries or on skill sets that they can convey. But the kicker is that they're only in school once or twice a week, max. The other 3-4 days out of the week, they're out on a job site. They get monthly stipends, so they're paying these young people. And it's a business that is actually shaping that young person's education post 14, 15 years old. So they're really, and it's not in this way that's, I think, would rub us wrong here. I think we just end up letting kids be kids for way too long, and it's the video game generation, and we have really low expectations. And we also think that learning should only take place. You brought up my love of learning earlier. I'm just convinced that learning is more efficient, has more stickiness. It's not about cramming, which is how I largely made my way through undergrad.
Yeah.
But it's about putting young people in situations and giving them opportunities to try things out with their hands often, and make those mistakes. But it's all that often takes leaving the schoolhouse to learn. And there's so much knowledge that you can pick up, both soft skills wise, interpersonal skills, communication, but certainly technical skills as well, on a job and in a job, and working along people who have gone before you. And that's the real beauty of what we do, is we put our kids right alongside experts in their industry, and they're the ones shaping them to enter that industry. It's not a math teacher that's never swung a hammer before. Although clearly we are also connecting all those math skills directly, and that's something else that was missing even in my automotive technology. I mean, I never took physics. It's part of my just desire to get out of the building. Me and 2 other people in my senior year actually created a class that we had to petition the school board to allow us to do. It's called Environmental Field Studies, where we got to go caving for another 2 hours of the day. And we were looking for these Alabama cave shrimp. But I had to do that because my junior year, I took what was normally reserved for seniors. I took Environmental Field Studies 1, where we were testing streams and waters. And all of that was just to get me out of that building. I didn't want to sit in a desk and just be bored out of my mind. I wanted to wrestle and play soccer after school, but you had to be present at school to do those things. And so sports kind of kept me there, but I did everything and within, the allowed limits to not have to be stuck in a desk and instead be out in the real world. And I think that's what we're trying to expose our kids to, is how this world works, so that they can kind of learn those skills to navigate it at an earlier age. And eventually they're going to be the leaders of their communities. And so can we prepare them with the experiences, help them build the relationships, because we know social capital is such a big piece of this as well. But even a lot of where I was getting at with that before I kind of went off on my own tangent was that, one of our former superintendent who I worked under one summer in a fellowship, a state superintendent, he said that the best physics class he ever saw taught was in an automotive technology course about the internal combustion engine. And that's all physics, right? And so I was learning physics. I've still to this day managed to never take a physics class. I know a lot about physics. I know that because I know, a lot about building. I know a lot about automotive technology, and those things are just physics in action, right? Yep. So we're giving our kids the real world exposure to those things, and we're directly connecting the academic foundation that they need, because we can't just, I think we used to, certainly in the 70s and 80s, say, okay, we have vocational learning over here. Again, that's kind of what I went through in the 90s even, and then we have our academic learning. And, you're either going to college and you should be over here, or you're going to work and you should be over here. And unfortunately, I think it's a great opportunity, but the unfortunate part is now we have to do both. Like young people need to have skills, but they need to have this underlying academic foundation to be able to, in any industry, have upward mobility and to be able to provide for their families, and to be able to have the math skills and financial literacy skills that are necessary to both be successful in the job and also be successful leading your household.
Yeah, I think there has been an overemphasis on 4-year education, right? And I went to a public high school, but a very good public high school, and it was just this expectation that everybody should be going to a 4-year school, and I think that's put the country in a place where there's not enough. We talk about you hear the labor shortage, and I think it's because our population hasn't been trained in enough diverse skill sets, right? We're really a very 4-year mindset, right? A lot of high schools, most high schools are really thinking that way. So I think it's great to see these innovative models, and I'm sure they're incredibly hard because they're innovative, right? You're on the bleeding edge of, you have charter schools, which are sort of, let's call it more newer model, and then you have vocational training schools, and then this hybrid approach that you're talking about is on the bleeding edge, and it's really unique, and we need more folks doing it. So that's why
another big just lesson, and it ties directly to what we're talking about, is we're setting a lot of kids up for failure, and that was our biggest lesson in New Orleans. So the school that I started there was pre-K through 8. So many of our kids had, a couple of them literally had not been in school for 2 years after Katrina, because they had bounced around from Houston or Baton Rouge and just never got settled because they didn't have a place of their own. Their houses had all been underwater and the school system had basically shut down. So we had a longer school day, and we had all of our homerooms were named after the teacher's alma mater. And so we had this college going mindset, and our goal was to get every kid by the end of 8th grade ready to go on to a college prep high school. And many high schools across the country now measure themselves on how many kids, like you said, how many kids are we sending off to college. And that's the wrong metric. Like, our goal is not to, nobody's going to hire you because you were able to get into college, right? All that matters is what you come away from college with. And right now in this country, we know for a fact they're going to come away with a lot of debt. But are you coming away with anything else that's tangible? And if you go off for 3 years, and even even the way that college is set up, the first 2 years is just about checking boxes of prerequisites that you're not going to be interested in that don't have anything to do with your major. So even if your major was something that's technical like engineering, you're still doing you have to take a music class or an arts-based class. You have to take a language class that may or may not set you up for success in that major. You have to take, you know, certainly with engineering, math is going to pay off. But if you're going into teaching the humanities instead, those math courses you're taking may not be as helpful in four-year universities. And so one is really inefficient. Two, over those 2 or 3 years, especially if you're a child that's coming out of poverty, maybe a first-generation college student, well, there are a lot of things constantly clawing back at you. Mom and dad lose their job. Hey, we need you to come home. We can't send you any money. And even with something like Pell that pays tuition, what we know about people in poverty is there are all these other things that are all these added expenses that we often overlook: transportation, childcare, putting food on the table, room and board. Like those are things that are, you know, are a luxury we overlook if we're, you know, growing up with means. But you know, those things are hard to balance for 4 years straight or longer, especially if you're sending a kid who's not fully ready and they have to take remedial coursework. And so what we've ended up doing is setting a lot of people up to go off to school, find that that's not where they want to be, that's not where they need to be, that's not what they're ready for. They're taking on debt throughout that time and really just wasting their time. You know, with 3 degrees, education pays off. Like, I'm not here to say that it doesn't. The thing that we do a disservice of is exposing kids to career opportunities and interests and surveying them and helping them to get a better feel for what they want to do in life. Because even a lot of folks who graduate with a certain degree, certainly in liberal arts especially, don't necessarily know or have a direct path to a career with that. And then they go and flounder or spend a gap year or travel, which is great if you can afford that or if you have somebody to cover that. But for many of our kids, that's a luxury we just can't, that will never be there. So we have to get them to a stable place first. And then hopefully if they go work for a company and that company likes you enough, often they'll pay for you to finish your education. Right? You come out of that debt free. Or they'll become your first client if you want to launch your own small business and you have somebody there. You know, if you see a partner who's, I mean, you guys deal with this all the time, a supplier who's not getting you what you need on time. Well, hey, this employee of yours can go launch a small business and they're going to get you what you need on time because they have a better feeling of what it's like on the ground for you, whereas your supplier may not be able to meet that. So that's the way we look at this is, you know, we don't have to follow that normal path and by the age of 22 graduate with a 4-year degree. But can we get our kids to a place of stability economically, skill-wise, to where they can make those decisions and have greater opportunity and more doors open for them?
So to talk specifically about your program, after 8th grade, students join, and then there's some classwork in a combination of actual workforce training. And so can you talk to me, just give me an understanding of like the balance of classroom work versus being in the field, and talk to me about specifically the field work. I'm really curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, every kid's path through us is a little different, and that's part of what we learned, or I learned throughout my career in education as well, as cookie cutter, one size fits all schools and pathways through school are not what works for kids. Like there is no average. We look at averages a lot. They can be helpful, but 90% of our kids are either above average, below average. There are very few who are actually on that point. And so we personalize each kid's pathway depending on where they are, what they come in with. So we do assessments early, where are your math skills, where are your language arts skills, so we can start intervening. 9th and 10th grade is about really figuring out who they are. So in humanities class, in our career prep classes, they're getting exposure to speakers who are talking to them about all kinds of different jobs, both in the industry, real estate, construction, but also other jobs, just mentors, people that look like them that may be in roles that they've never even heard of. We say a kid can't be what a kid can't see. And so it's about just exposing them so they can both figure out what they're good at, what they enjoy, and what they may want to pursue. And so early on, there's more coursework and less out of school work. We're getting kids caught up academically. We are, all of the academics, we're trying to link directly to skills that will pay off in the workforce. So even, of course, math, we teach geometry in a learning lab, a construction lab, where kids are learning to use tools, learning to use miter saw, but it's all about angles, right? It's all about shapes and their structural integrity. And of course, if you're building roof trusses, that's all geometry, right? And so they get that practice in a more kind of secure, supervised setting, and similar to shop class, but we're teaching, again, an entire math class that they get to check the box off of. And that allows us in the math classroom over 4 years to add a fifth class, which is financial literacy, talking about mortgages, talking about budgeting, talking about savings and investments and entrepreneur thinking. And so that's 2 years is more heavily focused on getting kids caught up, where they need to be academically, and exposing them to all these, possible pathways they could go down. Actually, just yesterday we had our career declaration day. And of course, it's kind of loose. We're not saying this is what you're committing to the rest of your life, but then because they've gotten a feel for a lot of these things, our sophomores do career declaration. Then we try and start preparing them for internships in those fields, and then we also start junior and senior year. They do dual enrollment, where they can go to a community college and start taking courses that align with that. And so when they go off and take college classwork, which, don't get me wrong, everything I said earlier, every kid needs something beyond high school. A high school diploma is not enough anymore, but that can look different. It doesn't have to be a 4-year degree, right? And so we start lining kids up both with their internships and kind of work experience, and also their coursework with the path they want to take, that career that they're at least seeking out. And they're going to get, so they're going from exposure to more engagement with those fields, and with those different tools that they'd be using, different ways of thinking about this work. And so if they want to go into design and become an architect like you, they're still going to have to go through a 5-year college, but we can start taking some of those steps, or maybe a 4-year college. We can probably fast track some of that, and we can get them to spend time with an architect first, to make sure that they don't go through 5 years and then figure out that once they are 6 months on the job that they hate it, and they'd rather be actually doing the building, not the design side. So that's kind of the thinking of junior, senior year. And then finally, really immersion is the third step. So we kind of chunk it out in 2-year, 3 different 2-year chunks of identity and exposure, engagement, and then exploration, engagement, and then really immersion. Of by the time they graduate our high school component, we still stick with them, but they should be fully probably working 30 hours a week, taking 8 to 10 hours of coursework, or doing apprenticeships where they have actual structured training time. But they're fully focused on careers by the time they leave us in high school. But we still don't just say, okay, good luck, come back and see us once you've gotten that $40,000 a year job. We instead, they're matched with a student success coach that helps them navigate this world out there, so that they can make sure they're taking the right courses. They're, learning how to have the tough conversations with their HR manager that, hey, I'm no longer an intern. I shouldn't be stuck in that $10 range anymore. I've been here 2 years, that sort of thing. So, just helping prepare them to navigate the world, because they may not have somebody at home to bounce those ideas off of. That said, our parents are extremely supportive, but most of our parents didn't have the opportunity that their kids are now getting. And we hear a lot, I wish they had that when I was that age. And me too. I wouldn't have had to create all these classes and finagle my way out of school if there were ever been a program like that.
Interesting. So I love that career declaration idea. I'm at, like students, like high school kids, when they're going to pick a college and go to get a scholarship, they stick.
Same idea, but it's putting a hard hat on as opposed to University of Alabama.
Yep. Cool. I could see that being fun for the students to we
invited our community partners out. It was really cool.
That's fun. So the other thing I wanted to make sure we touched on was this home ownership component, because you talked about the ability to earn equity and learn the skills of renovating a house or fixing up a house. So talk to me about that. That seems to be unique, I guess, to build up.
And even my background with this, what I didn't mention is that first house that I bought when I was 27 or 28 was a duplex. And so right off the bat, I had renters renting and covering 3/4 of my mortgage. And I had a couple of roommates that lived in my unit with me. And so now I'm making money off of my house. And then a few years later, after I got married, my wife was brilliant. We were watching this show called Income Property, and
Hmm.
we had an unfinished basement that we eventually turned into 2 additional units. And that's
Hmm.
part of how I was able to up and move. By this time, I had a 6-month-old and moved my family from New Orleans to Boston to go pursue this other degree. And
Hmm.
I could, so my wife could still stay at home and raise our little baby girl, and I could be a student because we had 4 units now. And by that time, we had added some additional properties. But homes are not only opportunities for wealth building by gaining equity, but they're also opportunity for increasing your passive income, right? And again, housing is everything in this country. And so home ownership was the real turning point for this. And what makes us different than just about every other program out there is by the time they get a high school diploma from us, that associate's degree or credential, home builder's license, whatever the path they choose, but a sheet of paper that says I can make money in this world. Then third is what we call the path to the middle class. So that's either taking a $40,000 a year job, ideally with a company you've been spending time with and are comfortable with, seeing your career progress with them, or going on to a 4-year degree. So if you did spend some time with architect and you did your 2 years of associate's degree, kind of preparing to go on to pursue that, and yeah, you may still have to go to a 4-year university, but you have a set path now, and you've already gotten a lot of the classes that you're not going to enjoy out of the way. The third is to actually launch a small business, which is a tough road, but our kids, a lot of them have really great ideas, and they can help create opportunities in their community and create jobs at the same time. And if that can help put some money in their pockets, then it's another good path in the middle class. But once they have that kind of economic grounding, we're in the process of launching a CDFI, a community development financial institution, that will put together a 0% interest mortgage product so they can build that wealth a lot faster, pay their houses off after 20 years. And the key thing about home ownership too is just that it anchors you to the community. One, you're going to take better care of your home if you own it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're building wealth from it rather than if somebody else owns it and they're the ones gaining wealth and gaining equity. The other thing is it kind of does, you have more pride in it, right? And you have pride in things you own. You have pride in your neighborhood when you know that, hey, I'm here for the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
Our kids grew up in these neighborhoods, but they've only seen just disinvestment and decline in housing. And so the real transformational aspect of this is we're putting teams of youth who have spent time together. They got each other's back, and that they can own homes and eventually rental properties in their community and really begin to change the entire fabric of their community. But it's not a bunch of outside investors coming in and buying everything up and fixing it up. It's young people from within solving their own community's most pressing issues. And so that's the end goal from this. And a lot of it still has to play out.
Yep.
We're 5 years into this. So we've had some high school graduates who are getting closer to home ownership. We have students living in houses. As we finish them, they move in, but it's mom or dad or grandparent renting. Mm-hmm. And this is a big shift. So it goes from renting to owning, and that changes everything.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot of, just thinking about the different, it's a more complex model perhaps than traditional education. So I imagine there's so much coordination that has to be done because each of these students has their own path. And so you're trying to figure out, is an associate's degree the right thing, or is this? And kind of a choose your own adventure, I would call it. Is how I think about it. And it makes sense given your background, right? Trying to kind of create your own classes. I thought, that's great. Have you had any students petition you for a class or anything? Has anybody flipped the tables like that? Tables.
I am certain that they're choosing all the time what they're building in their construction class. So a lot of we do arts integration. They're building. This was an interesting. It wasn't us choosing. It was more a bunch of mosquitoes. We have a used tire shop right on the other side of our new campus, and it's just a breeding ground because all the rain we get fills these tires. Breeding ground for mosquitoes, and so instead of just cutting shapes out of wood to get to know how to use a miter saw or a scroll saw or something, our instructor there actually started building bat boxes so we could hang them on the outside of the building and on trees nearby so we could attract bats to live here. And each bat eats over 1,000 mosquitoes an hour. And so that was kind of the mosquitoes choosing our curriculum for us,
Yeah.
our content. You know, and again, our kids, it is a name your own adventure, and they're choosing, you know, who they want to intern for. We try and get more employer partners at the table than we even need, so that, you know, they can have some choices, and it's not this guy's willing to take you, so you got to go there. It's what are your interests? What are you excited about? And you can align that with an opportunity.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you know, I've enjoyed learning a little bit about your background and more about Build Up. Is there anything else that you wanted to share today that you feel like we haven't touched on?
No, I mean, the reason you and I got to know each other and appreciate each other's work is that we're just tackling age-old problems with new and not incredibly, like, yes, we are extremely comprehensive in what we're doing, but no single component is something like new and unique that we've never done before in this country.
Yeah.
It's just looking for opportunities to do stuff more efficiently, more cost effective, because especially our inner city communities need that. Faster, you know, vandalism, theft, those things are real, and stick-built construction in our community is not all that efficient, right? And closing the envelope, so being able to roll in a modular house is, I mean, I think that's where we're going with the future of construction. So I would just encourage anyone listening to this to look at your challenges, look at your pain points in your community or in your work, and think outside the box, because too often I think in our country we're complacent, and we're just bringing solutions to the table that we've always done, and those largely are not getting the results we want and need, especially for folks that don't have the opportunity that many of us had growing up.
Yeah. Well, it's great. I think it's an inspiring program. It makes me think some of the work we're doing with this group called the Trade Institute of Pittsburgh, a vocational training program here locally. And yeah, it's always
you got to be thinking about your future talent too. So anybody that owns a company that's listening, find a high school that's willing to send kids your way and start shaping them. Give them opportunities after school, over the summer. Even if they go off to a 4-year university, have them come back for the summer and work for you. You know, develop your own talent pipeline, because those are going to be your loyal employees. I mean, there's not a lot of loyalty in the job place, and especially when we get, you know, to we've had unemployment rates at record lows, not necessarily since COVID, but before that, record lows. And so it's a real battle for talent, but there's nothing better than developing your own, because it does, you get that loyalty aspect too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Mark, thank you for making time today. I really appreciate it.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Talk to you later.
All right.